Sold for $2 on a frozen morning, a woman nobody wanted meets a silent mountain giant who buys her with a single nod yet frees her with a vow. When soldiers and a vengeful judge come hunting, will she claim her worth or learn that mercy can be fiercest weapon? The wind was a blade against my skin. It sliced through the thin wool of my shawl, a cruel reminder of how little stood between me and the unforgiving January air. Below me, the people of Frostpine Hollow huddled together, their breath pluming like smoke, their faces pinched and pale in the stark winter light. They looked up at the auction block at me, and I saw nothing in their eyes but cold curiosity, or worse, pity. My name is Serafina, and I was 23 years old. I stood on that creaking platform of frost-slicked wood, shivering not just from the cold, but from a shame so profound it felt like a physical sickness. This was the culmination of my life, to be sold like a side of beef at the monthly market. "What am I bid for this one?" the auctioneer, a man named Gideon, with a face like a wizened apple, bellowed into the frigid air. His voice cracked sharp as breaking ice. A strong back she is, good for hearth and home kitchen work or mending. Built sturdy against the cold, my cheeks burned with a fire that did nothing to warm me. Sturdy, that was the word they always used, a polite term for the soft, full figure I'd carried my entire life. In a town that valued women as delicate as frost ferns, I was a snowdrift, wide, soft, and in the way. I wanted to dissolve, to melt into a puddle and seep between the floorboards, to vanish from their sight. But there was nowhere to go. My stepfather, Corbin, had made sure of that when he'd shoved me from our cabin door that morning, his grip like iron on my arm. The ruin had begun 3 months prior with the first heavy snow of the season. Corbin had come home from the tavern not just drunk but broken. The stench of sour ale and despair clung to him like a second skin. He'd lost more than his wages at the card table this time. He'd gambled away our home, the small plot of land our family had worked for generations, everything. He'd bet it all on a losing hand. "It's your fault, you know," my stepmother Mariah had hissed at me just hours ago, her words small, sharp icicles. "All these years feeding you, clothing you. For what, another mouth to feed and no prospects? No man wants a wife built like a broodmare before she's even had a foal." The words still echoed in my head, a cruel counterpoint to the auctioneer's call. I had always known I was different. While other girls were willowy reeds, I was a sturdy oak. My hips were wide, my bosom full, my face more handsome than pretty. In Frostpine Hollow, that was a sentence to invisibility. "Do I hear 50 cents? Gideon tried again, his voice straining against the crowd's indifference. Dead silence, broken only by the whistling wind. Someone snickered, a harsh, ugly sound. "Come now, folks, the winter's long and hard. She's young and healthy, won't wilt in a blizzard." Nothing. Tears, hot and sharp, pricked the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back, refusing to let them freeze on my cheeks. Even here at the absolute nad bottom of society, I was unwanted. The shame was a physical weight pressing down, threatening to crush me. I spotted my step-family at the edge of the crowd. Corbin, his face sullen, avoiding my gaze. Mariah, her arms crossed, her expression one of grim satisfaction. Corbin needed the money to appease the men he owed, and Mariah had convinced him I was the only asset left to sell. "She's not really our blood anyway." I'd heard her whisper to him last night through the thin cabin wall. Her father left her with us when he died, but it was never a permanent arrangement. It was a lie. A venomous, convenient lie. But I had learned long ago that truth had no currency in that house. I was a burden, a reminder of the brother Corbin had lost to lung fever a decade ago, my father. 25 cents, Gideon's voice was growing desperate. A few people began to drift away, their interest waning. The sun was a pale, useless disk in the sky, and there were other wares to inspect, other bargains to be made. Why waste time on a girl nobody wanted? I closed my eyes, seeking refuge in the darkness behind my own lids. I conjured memories of my real father, his voice, a warm hearth in the cold expanse of my childhood. He would tell me stories of shield maidens who saved themselves of magic, slumbering deep in the mountains of love found in the most unlikely of winters. Silly stories Mariah would scoff, snatching the worn books from my hands. "Fill your head with that nonsense and you'll never learn your place." But those stories, that nonsense, had been my only warmth. They had been the small embers of hope I'd nurtured through the long, lonely years. Now standing on this block, those dreams felt like the most foolish indulgence of all. 10 cents, Gideon was practically shouting now. 5, a voice called out from the back, followed by a wave of cruel laughter. My face flamed. 5 cents. The price of a stale loaf of bread. That was the sum of my worth. Just as Gideon lifted his gavel, his expression grim, ready to declare me unsold and cast me aside, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter died. The murmuring ceased. A sudden profound hush fell over the market square. Not the silence of boredom, but the heavy, expectant silence that precedes a storm. A shadow fell over me, vast and dark, eclipsing the weak winter sun. I looked up and saw the crowd parting, shuffling aside with a mixture of fear and awe. They were making way. I opened my eyes and my breath caught in my throat. He was a mountain. That was the only word for him. Not just tall, though, he must have been near 7 feet, but broad and solid, as if carved from the granite heart of the peaks themselves. His shoulders were wide enough to bear the weight of a fallen pine, his hands large enough to crush stone. Dark winter-brown hair shot through with threads of silver fell unbound around his shoulders. A thick, well-kept beard framed a face that was all harsh angles and grim lines. He wore simple, functional clothes, a heavy leather vest over a wool shirt, dark trousers, and worn boots that had clearly trod many miles of snow-covered trails. But it was his eyes that captured me. They were the gray of a winter sky just before a blizzard, stormy and deep. Yet they weren't cruel. I saw a weariness in them. A profound sadness, perhaps, but not the casual cruelty I saw in the faces below me. He stopped directly before the platform, the snow crunching under his immense weight. He looked up, and for a heart-stopping moment our eyes met. I felt a jolt, a strange, nameless recognition. It wasn't fear, though his presence was undeniably intimidating. It wasn't pity, a currency I had come to despise. It was something else. It was as if he saw past the flesh, past the shame, and looked directly into the frozen, hidden core of me. $2, he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble like stones shifting in a riverbed. It was quiet, yet it carried across the silent square with absolute authority. Gideon the auctioneer blinked, his jaw slack. Did you say $2, sir? I did. The energy surged back into Gideon's body. $2. I have a bid of $2. Do I hear $2.50, a fine price for a strong winter worker? No one moved. No one spoke. The giant man simply stood there, his gaze fixed on me, patient as a glacier. $2.25, Gideon pleaded with the silent crowd. Still nothing. The giant waited. Going once for $2, the crack of the gavel echoed in the silent square. Going twice, another crack. Sold for $2, too. Gideon paused, squinting down at the mountain of a man. Your name, Sir Cale, the man said, the single word seeming to fill the air. Sold a Cale for $2. And just like that, for the price of a winter coat, my life changed hands. The crowd began to murmur again, their voices a distant buzz. I could only stare at the man Cale, who now owned me. He held my gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a friendly gesture, not exactly. It was the nod of a man who has made a decision and will see it through regardless of the consequences. Gideon motioned for me to come down. My legs felt like brittle twigs, but I managed the wooden steps without stumbling. When I reached the snow-packed ground, Cale was waiting. Up close, he was even more immense. I had to crane my neck to see his face, feeling like a sapling at the foot of an ancient redwood. He reached into his coat, produced a small leather pouch, and counted out the coins into Gideon's eager hand. A pleasure doing business with you, Gideon chirped, tipping his hat. Cale didn't reply. His stormy gray eyes found mine. Come, he said. It wasn't a request, nor was it an order delivered with malice. It was a simple statement of fact. It was time to go. I cast one last look around the square. My stepfamily was already walking away, their backs turned no doubt, heading for the tavern to spend their $2. No one else paid me any mind. I was old news. Taking a deep, cold breath that burned my lungs, I turned and followed the giant man as he moved through the crowd. Whatever lay ahead up the frozen mountain paths he was leading me to, it had to be better than what I was leaving behind. At least I prayed it would be. The road out of Frostpine Hollow was a treacherous track of ice and frozen mud, but Cale walked it with a long, sure-footed stride. I had to half-jog to keep up my worn shoes, slipping, my lungs aching from the thin, frigid air. After a few minutes of my ragged breathing, he seemed to notice, and his pace slowed just enough that I no longer felt as though my chest would burst. We walked in silence for the first hour. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the snow and the mournful sigh of the wind through the bare branches of the aspens. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to decipher the man who had bought me. His expression was as unreadable as a weathered stone, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. I knew the stories, of course. Everyone in the valley knew of the mountain giant. He descended from his solitary peak 4 or 5 times a year, a silent, brooding presence. He'd trade furs, buy supplies, flour, salt, steel, pay in cash, and vanish back into the wilderness without a word more than was necessary. Some whispered he was a madman, an outlaw hiding from his past. Others said he was just strange. The town children dared each other to touch the hem of his coat, but none ever had. He was too large, too silent, too other. But as I walked in his shadow, I noticed things the townsfolk missed. I saw how he instinctively moved to the windward side of the path, shielding me from the worst of the biting gusts. When a farmer's wagon rattled past, he placed himself between me and the horses without a thought. They were small things, almost imperceptible, but they planted a tiny seed of doubt in the fertile ground of my fear. The path began to climb, winding its way into the foothills. The pine trees grew thicker, their snow-laden branches muffling the sound of the wind. The air grew colder but cleaner, scented with pine and snow. I had lived my whole life in the valley, but I'd never been this far into the mountains. "Are you tired?" His voice, so sudden in the profound silence, made me jump. It was the first time he'd spoken since we'd left the town. A little, I admitted, my own voice, a reedy whisper. He stopped and shrugged a heavy pack from his shoulders. He produced a water skin. "Drink." The water was shockingly cold, but it was the purest, sweetest water I had ever tasted, a world away from the brackish well water in town. I drank deeply, my throat aching with gratitude. When I handed it back, my frozen fingers brushed against his. His hand was calloused and huge, but there was a warmth to it that startled me. "Thank you," I managed. He just nodded, stowing the skin away. "The path gets steeper. Tell me if you need to rest." The offer was so unexpected it left me speechless. In Corbin and Mariah's house, admitting weakness was a cardinal sin. Tiredness was laziness. Hunger was greed. Sickness was an excuse to shirk work. But Cale's offer felt genuine, as if it actually mattered to him whether I could continue. We started walking again, and he was right. The path grew steeper, becoming a series of winding switchbacks carved into the mountainside. My legs began to burn, and my thin shoes, with their worn-out soles, offered no protection from the sharp rocks hidden beneath the snow. Just as I thought I would have to swallow my pride and ask for another rest, he stopped again. This time he was looking down at my feet. "Those shoes are not fit for this mountain," he stated, his voice flat. I looked down, a fresh wave of shame washing over me. "I'm sorry. They are all I have. Wait here." He moved off the path, disappearing into the dense pines. He returned a few minutes later, his arms full of dry, springy moss he'd gathered from the lee side of a rock outcropping. Without a word, he knelt in the snow before me. "Lift your foot." I hesitated. A man, especially a man like this, kneeling before me, felt deeply wrong, dangerous. But the quiet command in his voice held no threat. I trusted it. I lifted my right foot. He took my shabby shoe in his hand, and with surprising gentleness began stuffing the soft moss inside, packing it around my foot, until it was snug and cushioned. He did the same with the left. His large, rough fingers were incredibly deft and careful. "Better?" he asked, rising to his full, intimidating height. I took a tentative step. The difference was immediate. The moss was a soft, insulating barrier against the cold and the stones. "Much better. Thank you." He gave that same small, economical nod, as if his kindness was a simple matter of logistics, not a favor deserving of thanks. We climbed higher. The world fell away below us, and when we paused again, I could see the whole of Frostpine Hollow nestled in its valley, a tiny, insignificant smudge against the vast white landscape. "It's beautiful," I breathed, the words escaping before I could stop them. "Yes," he agreed, his voice softer than I'd heard it. "It is." I glanced at him and saw he was looking out over the valley, and for a fleeting moment the harshness of his expression softened into something resembling melancholy. "Do you come down often?" I asked, emboldened by the shared moment. "Only when supplies run low. 4, maybe 5 times a year. Don't you get lonely up here by yourself?" He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he turned his gaze from the valley to me. "Lonely," he said, his voice a low rumble, "is better than unwelcome." And in those 5 words I understood a part of him. I, who had been surrounded by people my entire life, had never felt more alone than I did in Frostpine Hollow. He had simply chosen a different kind of solitude. The sun was bleeding orange and purple across the western peaks when we finally reached a clearing. In its center stood a log cabin, larger and more solid than I had expected. It was built of massive interlocking logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it, a separate building with a taller chimney of its own. A workshop, I presumed, stood silent against the snow. Smoke curled lazily from both chimneys, a sign of banked fires left to smolder. He lived here alone, just as the stories said. The place was meticulously cared for. The porch was swept clean of snow. Firewood was neatly stacked against one wall. Everything about it spoke of order and purpose. Cale mounted the steps and pushed open the heavy wooden door, holding it for me to enter first. The wave of warmth that hit me was a physical shock. It wrapped around me like a blanket, chasing the deep, biting cold from my bones. The cabin's interior was a single large room dominated by a massive stone fireplace, where a bed of coals glowed cherry red. A kitchen area with a hand pump for water and shelves of provisions occupied one corner. The furniture was all handmade from dark, heavy wood, but it was crafted with a skill that was plain to see. A large table, sturdy chairs, shelves filled with books, actual books, and hand-woven rugs on the floor. It was a home. A real solid, warm home. "You can take the back room," Cale said, gesturing to one of two doors leading off the main room. "I'll bring your things." "I don't have any things," I said quietly. He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw a flicker of raw anger in his gray eyes. It wasn't directed at me. It was for the people who had sent me into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on my back. "Then we will get you some," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He showed me to the room. It contained a simple bed with a thick mattress and a pile of wool blankets, a washstand and a wooden chest. The single window looked out on a breathtaking vista of endless snow-covered peaks. "Are you hungry?" he asked from the doorway. I was starving. I hadn't eaten since the small, grim piece of toast I'd choked down that morning. The long, cold climb had devoured all my energy, but fear and pride warred within me. What if he resented feeding me? What if he expected me to cook, and I failed to meet his standards? My stomach answered for me, a loud, embarrassing growl in the quiet room. A ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, a tiny shift in the stern landscape of his face. "I will make supper," he said. He left me alone. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress yielding softly beneath me, and tried to process the dizzying turn my life had taken. This was not what I had braced myself for. I had expected a cold shed, a pile of straw, a list of back-breaking chores. Instead, I had a warm room, a comfortable bed, and the promise of a hot meal. The sounds of cooking drifted from the main room, the clank of an iron pot, the rhythmic slosh of the water pump, the sizzle of something hitting a hot pan. The smells that followed were divine: roasting meat, onions, herbs. Real food. For the first time in months, perhaps years, a fragile, unfamiliar feeling began to thaw in the frozen wasteland of my heart. It was hope. The next morning I awoke to a profound silence, broken only by the soft whisper of wind outside my window. For a disorienting moment I didn't know where I was. The bed was too soft, the blankets too warm, the air too clean. Then the memories of the previous day rushed back: the auction, Kyle, the long climb. I had slept like the dead, a deep, dreamless slumber untouched by the usual anxieties. Sunlight, pale but bright, streamed through the window, illuminating swirling dust motes. It was late. At home, sleeping this late would have earned me a tirade from Mariah and a day of punishing chores. A knot of panic tightened in my stomach. I dressed quickly in my worn, travel-stained dress, my only possession, and eased open my bedroom door. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the main room. Cale was already up, standing at the stove. In the confines of the cabin he seemed even larger, his head nearly brushing the wooden beams of the ceiling. Yet he moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, a man accustomed to containing his own immense strength. "Good morning," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned a spatula in his hand. "Morning. You slept well?" "Yes, thank you." I stood awkwardly, wringing my hands, unsure of my role. What work would you like me to do today?" He looked at me, his gray eyes searching. "Work, yes, sir. The cooking, the cleaning. I can mend clothes if you have any that need it. I can tend animals if you keep them. I'm not very good with gardens, but I can learn once the snow melts." I was babbling, trying to list my meager skills to prove my $2 worth. He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You do not have to call me, sir," he said finally, "and you do not have to work today. You have only just arrived." The concept was so alien it didn't compute. "But you bought me. You paid $2. I must earn my keep." That flicker of anger I'd seen yesterday returned to his eyes, sharp and hot. "I did not buy you to work you like a mule," he said, his voice a low growl. "Sit. Eat breakfast." The aroma of the food was making me dizzy with hunger, but I hesitated. "Are you sure I could cook for you?" "Sit," he repeated, his tone firm but not unkind. He gestured to the table with the spatula. "Eat." He served me a plate piled high with scrambled eggs, thick-cut bacon, and a slice of toasted bread heavy and dense with butter and jam. It was a feast, more than I would normally eat in 2 days. I tried to eat slowly, politely, but my hunger was a ravenous beast, and I had to physically restrain myself from devouring it all in seconds. Cale sat opposite me with his own plate, eating in a comfortable silence. He was a neat eater. I noticed a stark contrast to Corbin's drunken, slobbering meals. "This is delicious," I said, my voice thick, with unshed tears of gratitude. "You are welcome." After breakfast, he insisted on showing me the rest of the property. He showed me the pantry stocked with sacks of flour and beans, jars of preserves and dried meats. He showed me the root cellar dug into the hillside, cool and smelling of earth. Then he led me to the workshop. I was expecting a rough, dirty smithy. What I found stole my breath. Yes, there was a massive forge, a huge anvil, and all the hammers and tongs of a working blacksmith. But alongside them were tools of incredible delicacy, fine files, tiny chisels, delicate calipers, and displayed on shelves and workbenches were his creations. A rose wrought from steel, its petals so impossibly thin they looked as if a breeze could stir them. A small bird, its feathers etched with such precision it seemed poised for flight. A set of wind chimes that hummed with a clear bell-like tone when he brushed them with his finger. You made these," I whispered, reaching out to trace the wing of a metal butterfly that seemed to float on the air. Cale nodded, but he looked almost embarrassed, shuffling his large feet. "Just things to keep my hands busy." "They're not just things," I said, my voice filled with an awe I couldn't contain. "They're beautiful. They're like nothing I have ever seen." He looked genuinely surprised, as if no one had ever said such a thing to him before. "Most folk just want horseshoes or hinges. Most folk wouldn't know art if it shod their horse," I said, the words tumbling out before I could think. I blushed, afraid I had been too bold. But Cale wasn't offended. He was looking at me with a strange, wondering expression in his eyes. "You think it's art? I think it's magnificent." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the steel rose and held it out to me. "Take it." "Oh no, I couldn't," I stammered, taking a step back. "It's far too fine for someone like me." "Someone like you?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I gestured helplessly at my worn dress, my unkempt hair. "You know, I'm just me." His gaze was serious, intense. "And what is wrong with you?" The question was so direct, so earnest, it caught me completely off guard. What was wrong with me? Mariah's litany of my faults echoed in my head. "I'm too large, too plain, too useless. It's why no one would marry me. It's why they sold me." "Your step-family were fools," Cale said, his voice quiet but absolute. "And so was every person in that valley who could not see the woman standing right in front of them." Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time they were not tears of shame. No one had ever defended me. No one had ever spoken of me as if I had inherent worth. "You don't have to be kind," I whispered. "I know what I am." "Do you?" He held the rose out again, his expression unyielding. "Take it, not as a gift to someone lowly, but as a gift to the first person who understood what I was trying to create." My hand trembled as I took the rose from him. It was heavier than I expected, the steel cool against my skin. The petals were smooth, each curve and vein rendered with impossible artistry. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. The days that followed settled into a rhythm unlike anything I had ever known. It was a life of quiet purpose. Cale would rise before dawn and work in his forge. I would wake later, make breakfast, and we would eat together in the warm silence of the cabin. He never ordered me to do anything. He never raised his voice. He simply made space for me. Slowly, tentatively, I began to make that space my own. I started by cleaning the cabin, not because I was told to, but because I wanted to contribute, to bring order and care to this place that had given me sanctuary. I discovered I enjoyed cooking when I had good ingredients and wasn't doing it under Mariah's critical eye. Cale bought me clothes. He'd made a trip to a town 2 valleys over, returning with several simple, well-made dresses of warm wool and flannel, along with boots that actually fit and a heavy fleece-lined cloak. The first time I put on a dress that wasn't a hand-me-down, a dress that fit my body properly, I looked in the small mirror above the washstand and cried. For the first time, I didn't see a clumsy, oversized girl. I saw a woman. He gave me books from his shelves and time to read them. He gave me the freedom to walk the mountainside, to explore the snow-filled glades and frozen waterfalls, a liberty I had never been granted before. But the most precious gift he gave me was respect. He asked my opinion. He listened when I spoke. He treated me as if my thoughts had weight. In return, I found myself wanting to help him in any way I could. I started organizing his workshop, learning the names and uses of his tools. I learned to tend the forge fire, keeping the coals at the perfect glowing temperature for his work. The evenings became my favorite part of the day. After supper, we would sit by the fire. He would work on his delicate metal art, and I would read to him. Cale was an educated man. His library was proof of that, but his eyes tired after a long day of focusing on his craft. So I read to him tales of adventure books, of poetry, histories of faraway lands. He was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions, discussing the characters as if they were old friends. "You have a good voice for reading," he told me one evening after I'd finished a chapter. "Clear and steady." "My father used to say the same," I said, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. Before he passed, he would have me read to him. "What happened to him?" Cale asked gently, his hands never ceasing their work on a small copper leaf. "Lung fever. It took my mother when I was a child, too. That's how I ended up with Corbin, my father's brother, and Mariah. They never truly wanted me." Cale was quiet for a moment, his focus entirely on the piece in his hands. "It is a hard thing to lose family," he said, his voice low. "And harder still to be trapped with family that does not want you." The way he said it, the undercurrent of bitter experience in his tone, made me bold. "What about your family?" "Cale gone," he said, the word as final as a slam door. "My parents died when I was a boy. An uncle raised me. He was not a kind man. He saw my size as a tool to be used, but an inconvenience in a person." "Is that why you live up here alone?" "Partly," he admitted. "Mostly it is because when people in towns look at me, they see a monster. A threat. Up here," he gestured to the quiet cabin, the sleeping mountains outside the window, "I can just be." I looked at him, this quiet, gentle giant who had rescued me from a life of misery and asked for nothing in return. "I don't think you're a monster," I said softly. He looked up from his work, surprise stark on his face. No, I said, my voice firm with a conviction that surprised me. "I think you are the kindest man I have ever met." For a single breathtaking moment, his entire face transformed. The hard lines softened. The weary sadness in his eyes was replaced by a warm, glowing light. He looked younger, happier, less burdened. Then just as quickly, the mask slipped back into place. He looked down at his work again, but not before I saw the small, pleased smile at the corner of his mouth. "Thank you, Serafina," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." As the weeks melted into months, and the deep snows of winter began to pile high against the cabin walls, I realized something astonishing. I was happy. For the first time in my adult life, I woke each morning not with dread, but with a quiet sense of anticipation. I felt useful, appreciated, and above all, safe. More than that, I felt like myself. The real Serafina, the one who had been buried under a crushing avalanche of criticism and neglect, was slowly, tentatively beginning to emerge into the light. Up here on this mountain with only Kyle for company, I was free. And slowly, carefully, I began to hope for something more. Something I had never, ever dared to dream of before. I began to hope for love. Autumn had long since surrendered to winter's iron grip. The mountains were a stark, beautiful world of white snow, black rock, and the deep green of the pines. I had been living with Cale for 2 months, and I felt like a different woman. The cold mountain air had brought a healthy color to my cheeks. Good food had filled out my figure in a way that felt strong and womanly, not heavy and burdensome. I was learning to take up space in the world, to move with a confidence I'd never possessed. "Hand me that file if you would," Cale said from his workbench. The small flat one. I passed it to him without needing to look, my hands busy with my own project. I had come to know the geography of his workshop as well as my own small room. "What is this piece for?" I asked, watching him smooth the edge of a steel leaf he was crafting. "Mistress Henderson, down in Millbrook," he said, not looking up. "She ordered a set of cloak clasps shaped like ivy leaves. Her daughter is to be wed when the spring thaw comes. It's a lot of beautiful work for something so practical." Cale shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. No reason everyday things can't be beautiful. It was a philosophy that defined him. He put the same care and artistry into a simple hinge as he did into his decorative sculptures. Everything he made was built to last and to be beautiful. Could you teach me?" I asked, the question rushing out on a sudden wave of courage. He looked up surprised. "Teach you metalwork?" "Yes. I know I don't have the strength for the heavy forging, but perhaps the smaller things. The detail work, the engraving." He set down his file and studied me, his gray eyes serious. You want to learn the craft I want to learn to make beautiful things, I said. Like you do. He was quiet for a long time and I feared I had overstepped, had asked for something a woman was not meant to have. But then he gave a slow nod. We will start with copper wire. It is soft, malleable. You can learn the feel of the metal. The first lesson was a clumsy, frustrating affair. My hands, softened by years of indoor chores, ached from gripping the pliers. The copper wire seemed to have a will of its own, refusing to bend into the graceful swirls I envisioned. But Cale was a patient teacher. He stood behind me, his presence a warm, solid wall at my back. Like this, he said, his large hand covering mine, guiding my movement. Feel how the metal yields. Don't fight it. Persuade it. His hand was warm and calloused, his touch surprisingly gentle. Standing so close, I was acutely aware of him. The scent of forge smoke and clean wool. The low rumble of his voice, the sheer physical power he held so carefully in check. My focus drifted from the copper wire in my hands to the steady beat of my own heart. "Are you listening, Serafina?" he asked, his voice laced with gentle amusement. I realized I'd been staring at the strong column of his throat instead of the task at hand. A hot blush flooded my cheeks. "I'm sorry, I was thinking." He looked down at me, and for a breathless moment our faces were only inches apart. I could see the flecks of green in his stormy gray eyes, the small faded scar on his cheekbone. His gaze dropped to my mouth and I found myself looking at his. The air grew thick, charged with an unspoken energy. Then he stepped back, abruptly clearing his throat. "Perhaps that is enough for one day." "Did I do something wrong?" I asked, my voice small. "No," he said, turning away to busy himself at his workbench. "You did very well. We will try again tomorrow." That evening, a new awareness hummed in the air between us. The comfortable silence we usually shared was replaced by a tense, fragile quiet. When our hands brushed as we both reached for the breadbasket at supper, we both recoiled as if burned. The lessons continued and my skills slowly improved. My first finished piece was a simple bracelet of twisted copper. It was flawed and uneven, but it was mine, the first beautiful thing I had ever created with my own hands. "It is perfect," Cale said when I shyly showed it to him. "It's crooked," I countered, "and the clasp is clumsy." "It is perfect," he repeated, his voice firm, and the way he looked at me with such pride and warmth in his eyes made my heart perform a little flip in my chest. Our partnership in the workshop deepened. He began to trust me with more complex tasks. I learned to help him with the heavier work, bracing long pieces of hot metal on the anvil while he shaped them with his hammer. I loved watching him work, seeing the intense focus on his face transform into a quiet joy as a beautiful shape emerged from the raw glowing steel. "You should sell your art in the city," I told him one day, watching him put the finishing touches on a set of steel flowers so realistic I could almost smell their fragrance. "City folk have no use for such things," he said gruffly. "They want what is cheap and new." "Not all of them," I argued. "I've been reading your books, the ones about art and travel. There are patrons' galleries, people who would pay a great deal for work like this. Your craftsmanship is as fine as anything in those pictures." He looked skeptical. "And how would a man like me reach such people?" An idea bold and exciting began to form in my mind. I said slowly. "I could write letters. I could describe the work, perhaps include sketches. We could send a few small pieces to a gallery in the capital." "We?" he asked, his voice quiet. I blushed, realizing what I had said. "I mean, if you wanted the help, if you thought it was a good idea, you would do that. Help me sell my work." "Of course," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "We're a team, aren't we?" The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through winter clouds. It transformed him. "Yes, Serafina," he said softly. "We are." That night we sat at the table together planning. I was filled with a buzzing energy I'd never felt before. I sketched ideas, drafted letters, and calculated prices. "You have a good head for business," Cale remarked, watching me. "Do I? I've never had the chance to find out." "You do," he said with certainty. "You are practical and clever, but you have an artist's eye. It is a rare combination." His praise was a warm glow in my chest. "Thank you for believing in me." "And thank you," he said, his voice low and serious, "for believing in my work." We looked at each other across the lamplit table. The air was charged with that same electric awareness from the workshop. His eyes were warm, and I could see my own reflection in their stormy depths. I found myself leaning forward, drawn to him by an invisible current. He leaned forward too, his large hand moving across the table to cover mine. His fingers were about to touch mine when a log in the fireplace collapsed, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. We both jumped, the spell broken. But the feeling lingered. Later that night, as I lay in my warm bed listening to the wind howling outside, I could still feel the phantom touch of his hand on mine. I was falling in love with him. I had been for weeks. But did he feel the same? And even if he did, what future could there be for us? He had bought me. In the eyes of the law, I was his property. The thought should have terrified me. But it didn't. Lying there safe and warm with Kyle, just a wall away, I felt something I had never known before. I felt that I was home. The first hint of trouble arrived with the new year, riding on the back of a blizzard that sealed the mountain pass for a week. When the storm finally broke, I was outside shaking a rug free of dust in the crisp, clean air when I heard the sound of approaching horses. Visitors were so rare that the sound was immediately alarming. I looked down the path and my heart froze. 3 men on horseback were carefully making their way up the trail. "Cale," I called, my voice sharp with warning. "We have visitors." He emerged from the workshop, wiping his hands on a leather apron. His eyes followed my gaze and his entire body went rigid. The gentle artist vanished, replaced by something hard and dangerous. "Go inside, Serafina," he said, his voice a low command. "Stay there until they leave." "Who are they?" "Trouble," he growled. I obeyed without question, retreating into the cabin but positioning myself by the window where I could see and hear. The men rode into the clearing. The leader was a thin, wiry man with a face like a ferret and cold, calculating eyes. The other 2 were large, brutish men, clearly hired muscle. Cale Stoneheart, the leader, called out, his voice thin and reedy. "It has been a long time." Cale stepped out of his workshop, his massive frame blocking the doorway. "Captain Valerius," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "What brings you so far up my mountain?" "A military contract," Valerius replied, swinging down from his horse. "The garrison at Fort Braden requires new arms, swords, spearheads, arrowheads, 500 pieces, high-grade steel. We were told you were the only smith in this territory who can do the work." "I no longer make weapons," Cale said. "That is a shame. The pay is $500. It was a fortune." But Cale didn't even blink. "Find another smith. There is no other with your skill," Valerius pressed, taking a step closer. "You are the only one. Then the army will have to make do with inferior steel." Valerius's thin lips tightened, still bitter about the war. "Stoneheart, this is business, not politics. War." The word sent a chill through me. One of Valerius's men, who had been scanning the clearing, noticed me at the window. Well, he said with a leering grin. "Looks like the mountain hermit isn't so lonely after all." Valerius's gaze snapped to the cabin, his cold eyes locking onto mine. His expression shifted, becoming shrewd. "Who is the woman, Stoneheart? She is of no concern to you." "Everything on this mountain is my concern right now," Valerius said, and started walking toward the cabin. "Come out, girl. Let's have a look at you." "Stay away from her," Kyle said, and his voice was the rumble of an avalanche. Valerius laughed a short, ugly bark. "Or what? I am here on official military business. I will speak to whomever I please." He reached the cabin steps just as Cale intercepted him. Cale's hand, huge and hard, clamped down on Valerius's shoulder, spinning him around. "I said stay away from her. And I said it is my right." Valerius snapped, gesturing to his men, who now had their hands on the hilts of their swords. "We can do this easily, or we can do this the hard way. You will make our weapons. We will pay you. Or we can find other means of persuasion." Cale's hands clenched into fists the size of small boulders. I had seen those hands create things of impossible delicacy. Now I saw their potential for brutal destruction. "Get off my land. Not until my business is concluded." Valerius glanced back at me, a cruel smirk on his face. "That is a handsome woman you have there. It would be a shame if something unfortunate were to happen to her while we were negotiating." It was the wrong thing to say. Cale moved with a speed that defied his size. One moment Valerius was threatening me. The next he was flying backward to land in a heap in the snow. His men drew their swords, but Cale was already on them. He seized the first man's sword arm, and I heard a sickening crack followed by a scream as the weapon clattered to the ground. He spun and drove the heel of his hand into the second man's face, dropping him like a sack of grain. It was over in seconds. 3 armed men defeated by 1 unarmed blacksmith. Valerius staggered to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. "You have made a grave mistake, Stoneheart. My only mistake, Cale growled, was not throwing you down the mountain the moment you arrived. This is not over. The army will have its weapons. If I see your face on my land again, Cale said, his voice deadly calm, I will kill you. That is not a threat. It is a promise. Valerius and his men scrambled back to their horses and rode away, leaving a trail of curses hanging in the cold air. I rushed outside. Cale stood in the trampled snow, his shoulders heaving, his hands still clenched. Are you hurt? I asked, my voice trembling. He wouldn't look at me. I am sorry you had to see that. I'm not sorry, I said, stepping closer. I am glad you were here to protect us. He finally turned to me, and the raw pain in his eyes was a physical blow. You don't understand, Serafina. This is what I am. This is why I live alone. When I am pushed, I become a monster. Those men were threatening us. They were threatening me. I could have handled it differently. How I cried. By letting them drag me out of my home, by agreeing to make weapons for them. He shook his head, turning away. You don't know. Then tell me, I called after him. What war was he talking about, Cale? What happened? He stopped. For a long moment there was only the sound of the wind. I was a soldier, he said, his back still to me. During the border wars 5 years ago. Valerius was my captain, and I was good at it. Too good. He turned slowly, and his face was a mask of self-loathing. They called me the Iron Hammer. I could break an enemy line by myself. I won battles that should have been lost. That sounds like something to be proud of. His laugh was a bitter, broken sound. Do you know what happens when you win battles by being a beast? Your own side starts to fear you as much as the enemy. When the war ended, they had no more use for me. The gentle giant who could forge a gate was useful. The killer who could shatter one was a liability. So you came here. I came here, he said, looking down at his massive hands. And I swore I would never raise my hand in violence again. But he threatened you. And in a heartbeat, I was that monster again. You are not a monster, I said, my voice shaking with conviction. I closed the distance between us, and without thinking, I took one of his large trembling hands in both of mine. You are a good man who was forced into an impossible situation. Listen to me, I insisted, forcing him to meet my eyes. I have lived with cruel men. I know what they look like. You are nothing like them. You used your strength today to protect me. To protect our home. There is no shame in that. Some of the terrible tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. You are not afraid of me, I am afraid for you, I said softly. I am afraid Valerius will come back, but I am not and will never be afraid of you. I saw tears glisten in his eyes. I do not deserve your faith. That is not for you to decide, I said. It is mine to give, and I choose to have faith in the man who makes steel roses and listens to poetry by the fire. A small, uncertain smile touched his lips. Together, then. Together, I confirmed. We're a team, remember, he squeezed my hand gently. Yes, we are. That night, the unspoken tension between us finally broke. He kissed me. It was a kiss born of shared fear and fierce relief of desperation, and a deep, aching tenderness. It was a kiss that promised protection and asked for solace. It was the first kiss of my life, and in it, I felt the last of the ice around my heart finally melt away. Spring arrived late in the mountains, a shy, tentative visitor. But when it came with a rush of life, turning the world from white and gray to 1,000 shades of green. The 7 months since I'd arrived at Cale's cabin had transformed me. The frightened, shame-filled girl from the auction block was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth. Our business was thriving. Letters I had written to a prestigious gallery in the capital had borne fruit. They were intrigued by my descriptions and sketches of Cale's work. We sent them a small collection of his metal art, and they sold every piece within a week, demanding more. We were no longer just surviving. We were building a life, and we had become lovers. The line we had crossed that winter night had led us into a new world, a world of shared warmth and quiet intimacy. We were partners in every sense of the word. The only shadow on our happiness was the unspoken legal status of our relationship. The fact that he had bought me. We never spoke of it, but it was always there, a ghost at our feast. The trouble, when it finally came, arrived on a perfect summer morning. I was in the garden humming to myself when I heard the horses. It was not Valerius this time. It was my stepfather Corbin and my stepmother Mariah, and with them was Judge Alistair, the circuit judge from the county seat. Cale, I screamed. He was by my side in an instant, his face a thundercloud. There she is, Judge Mariah shrieked, pointing a bony finger at me. You see, living in sin with this beast, just as we told you, Judge Alistair, a severe man with cold, unforgiving eyes, dismounted. Miss Blackwood, I presume. It is Whitmore, I said, my voice steady. I had taken back my father's name, Seraphina Whitmore. Indeed, I am Judge Alistair, and I am here because of serious allegations concerning your situation. We heard the most terrible rumors, dear Mariah, said her voice dripping with false sympathy, that this man was holding you here against your will. We came to rescue you. I do not need rescuing, I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. That is not for you to decide, the judge said coldly. According to the bill of sale, you were legally purchased by Mr. Stoneheart here. That makes you his indentured servant. And an indentured servant cannot legally consent to an intimate relationship with her master. It is a serious crime. The words were a physical blow. Property. Servant. Master. I am not his servant, I cried, and he is not my master. We are partners. The law sees it differently, Alistair said with grim satisfaction. Mr. Stoneheart, you will release this woman into my custody or you will face charges of kidnapping and assault. She does not want to go. Cale growled, his arm a protective barrier around me. Then you will be arrested. Think of the girl's reputation dragged through a public trial. I saw the conflict in Cale's eyes. If he fought them, he would only prove their accusations. An idea sharp and desperate sliced through my panic. Wait, I said, stepping forward. Judge Alistair, you said the issue is my legal status. That I am bound to Cale and therefore cannot consent. That is correct. Then what if that status were dissolved? What if Cale were to grant me my freedom here and now, before you as a witness? The judge looked irritated. It is highly irregular. But is it legal, I pressed. Well, yes. Then do it, I said, turning to Cale. Formally. Legally. Grant me my freedom. He looked confused, but he saw the desperate plea in my eyes. Trust me, I whispered. He straightened to his full magnificent height. I, Cale Stoneheart, he declared, his voice booming across the clearing, do hereby formally and completely release Seraphina Whitmore from any and all obligation to me. Her debt of $2 is forgiven. She is a free woman. There, I said, turning back to the judge, my heart pounding. Now I am a free woman. And as a free woman, I choose to stay here with the man I love. Alistair's face darkened. This is an outrage. You are still an unmarried woman living with a man. Morally questionable. Perhaps I shot back, but not illegal. I am of age and I am free to live as I please. Or are you suggesting a free woman has no rights in this territory? He was speechless. You sold me Corbin, I said, turning on my stepfather. You took money from me. You gave up any right to speak on my behalf. You have no claim on me. But we are your family, Mariah wailed. No, I said, the word like a stone. You cast me out. I have made my own family now. They left defeated and furious, their threats and curses swallowed by the vastness of the mountains. Cale pulled me into his arms, his embrace fierce. That was brilliant, he whispered into my hair. You taught me I had worth, I said, smiling up at him. I just started believing it. So you are a free woman now, he said, his expression serious. Free to go anywhere, to choose anyone. I am, I said softly. And who do you choose? I reached up and pulled his head down for a kiss. I choose you, you foolish, wonderful man. Always you. Our wedding took place in the autumn in a meadow golden with aspen leaves. It wasn't a ceremony sanctioned by any law or church. Our guests were a collection of misfits and outcasts, people who, like us, had found refuge and acceptance in the mountains. Old Maeve the herb woman officiated. Bjorn, a fur trapper with a kind heart, stood as Cale's witness. Isolde, a seamstress who had fled her abusive husband, stood as mine. We didn't need a judge's approval. We had the witness of a community built on love and mutual respect. That night, as we lay wrapped in each other's arms under a blanket of stars, Cale gave me a wedding gift. It was a necklace, a silver rose, so exquisitely crafted it looked real, a perfect echo of the first gift he had ever given me. You deserve everything beautiful, Seraphina, he whispered. I have it, I replied, touching his face. I have it all right here. A year later, our daughter Aurora was born. She was followed by a son, Orion, and another daughter, Lyra. Our mountain community grew, becoming a small town we named Haven. It was a place where your past didn't define you, and your worth was measured by the kindness in your heart. 20 years later, I stood in that same meadow watching our daughter Lyra marry a young man who had come to us as a runaway orphan. and had grown into a talented artist under Kale's tutelage. Kale came and wrapped his arms around me from behind his chin, resting on my head. "Best $2 I ever spent," he murmured against my hair. I smiled, leaning back against his solid, familiar warmth. "You didn't buy me my love. You set me free. And in doing so, you set yourself free too." The girl who had shivered on that auction block could never have imagined this life. She couldn't have dreamed of such love, such belonging. But she had learned that worth isn't something other people gave you. It was something you claimed for yourself. And once you knew your own value, once you understood that you deserved love and respect and happiness, no one could ever take that knowledge away from you. "I love you," she said to her husband. The same words she had spoken to him thousands of times over the years. "I love you too," he replied. The same words that still made her heart skip after all this time. And in that moment, standing in their meadow, surrounded by their chosen family, Serafina knew that her story had become exactly what it was always meant to be. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.